Strategy-driven RPGs have always found a natural home on PC. They're games that demand patience, foresight, and a love of systems layered on. From cult classics of the 90s to bold modern indies experimenting with new mechanics, these tactical gems prove that role-playing doesn't always mean swinging swords in real time. If there's one thing indie developers have always excelled at, it's taking risks where bigger studios won't. Horizon's Gate is the perfect example of this spirit. Released in 2020, it's a sprawling, open-ended tactical RPG that feels like it was pulled straight out of the golden age of PC gaming. The kind of game you'd stumble upon on a forum recommendation and then lose 100 hours to without even realizing it. At first glance, its retro pixel art might trick you into thinking it's a small, modest adventure. In reality, it's one of the most ambitious RPG sandboxes of the last decade. The core of this game is its hybrid of tactical turn-based combat and full-blown naval exploration. You aren't just leading a party into battles. You're also captaining a ship, charting courses across a vast ocean, trading goods, recruiting crew, and engaging in ship-to-ship warfare. You get the freedom to decide whether you'll carve your way through the world as a mercenary, a merchant, or a naval commander, and the game never punishes you for picking one style over another. The combat system itself deserves praise. It's highly tactical, rewarding positioning, combos, and smart use of class abilities. It feels deep enough to stand alongside classics like FF Tactics or Divinity Original Sin, but it's wrapped inside this massive, player-driven world where exploration is just as important as combat. That mix gives it a sense of scale and possibility you don't often see, especially from a one-person indie project. That said, it's not for everyone. The presentation is undeniably rough. The UI can be overwhelming, and it doesn't hold your hand. You need patience to learn its systems, and its old-school design philosophy can feel opaque compared to modern conveniences. It's not just another indie RPG lost in the noise. Horizon's Gate is one of those rare titles that reminds you why PC gaming has always been the place for experiments and ambition. If you've ever wished for more Fire Emblem, but wanted it with a raw, old-school PC edge, Vestaria Saga is exactly that. Developed by the original creator of Fire Emblem, these games feel like spiritual successors to his earlier work, with all the quirks, frustrations, and brilliance intact. At their core, they're all about large-scale, grid-based tactical battles. Units have distinct personalities. The maps are sprawling and layered with objectives, and choices on the battlefield ripple into the narrative. The difficulty is brutal. It's not uncommon to lose a beloved unit because you didn't plan 3 turns ahead, and the games rarely hold your hand with tutorials or modern conveniences. Some people see that as unfair, but others, especially fans of classic strategy RPGs, find it refreshing. It rewards patience, careful planning, and a willingness to learn from mistakes. What really makes it stand out is the writing. Despite its humble presentation, the storylines are surprisingly rich, weaving political intrigue with human drama. Characters may look like simple sprites on a map, but the dialogue gives them weight, making their fates feel personal. When someone dies permanently, it stings not just because you lost a unit, but because you lost a voice in the unfolding story. Of course, it's not flawless. The UI is clunky, the translation sometimes awkward, and the visuals look closer to a fan project than a professional release. But the heart of the design is so strong that these issues fade once you get pulled into its tactical depth. 2 improves on many of the first game's rougher edges, but both titles capture a style of strategy RPGs that's becoming increasingly rare. For PC players who love the genre, but want something different from the polished, mainstream releases, these hit just as hard as AAA efforts. They're tough, they're niche, and they demand your attention. But that's exactly what makes them unforgettable. Every so often, a game comes along that feels like it was designed specifically for fans who've been begging for a certain kind of experience to return. Symphony of War, the Nephilim Saga, is exactly that for people who grew up on Fire Emblem or Ogre Battle and felt like modern strategy RPGs had drifted too far from their roots. Released in 2022, it's a love letter to classic tactical RPGs, but with enough modern design choices to make it feel fresh instead of dated. At its core, Symphony of War expands on the idea of controlling squads rather than single characters. Instead of managing a lone unit on the battlefield, you command small armies that you've built from scratch, each one made up of soldiers, leaders, and specialized classes that work together. It turns every battle into a mix of big-picture tactics and micromanagement, where the composition of your squads can matter just as much as your battlefield positioning. It scratches that strategy itch in a way that few modern games even attempt. What really makes it shine, though, is the pacing. Too often, strategy RPGs can feel bloated or grind-heavy, but this moves at a pace that keeps you invested. Missions are challenging without being unfair, and the story, while not groundbreaking, has enough heart and drama to push you through. It's familiar territory with its political intrigue and fantasy backdrop, but the way it ties narrative progression into your growing army gives everything more weight. Of course, being an indie project, it has its limitations. The visuals are simple, leaning heavily on pixel art and retro aesthetics, and the presentation can't match big-budget contemporaries. The writing also stumbles in places, sometimes leaning on cliches you've seen 100 times before. But where it might lack in flash, it makes up for with sheer dedication to its mechanics. It's clear the developers knew exactly what fans of this genre wanted and poured their passion into delivering it. Back in 1993, when most RPGs were still text-heavy dungeon crawlers or tile-based adventures, Betrayal at Krondor landed like a thunderclap on the PC scene. It blended literary ambition with innovative mechanics, creating a game that many still point to as one of the greatest narrative-driven RPGs ever made. For years, it's been hailed as a cult classic, yet it remains criminally underplayed by modern audiences. What made it groundbreaking wasn't just its ties to a best-selling fantasy series, but how it treated the game as a novel you could play. Each chapter opened with prose, framed like a book you were stepping into, and then set you loose in a 3D world, primitive by today's standards but revolutionary at the time. Instead of relying on endless grinding, it emphasized puzzle-solving, strategy, and decision-making. Combat was turn-based and tactical, with positioning and resource management playing just as much of a role as raw stats. The writing, however, is what truly set it apart. The dialogue and descriptive text gave the sense you were reading a fantasy novel while playing through it, and that depth made even routine encounters feel alive. It had a maturity and literary flavor that most RPGs simply didn't attempt at the time. Players who invested themselves discovered branching paths, clever riddles, and choices that carried weight, rare for a game of that era. Of course, by modern standards, it can feel archaic. The interface is clunky, the visuals painfully dated, and the pacing demands patience. But those who push through find an experience brimming with heart and ambition, one that helped pave the way for the story-rich RPGs we now take for granted. It's not just a piece of nostalgia, it's a blueprint. Without Betrayal at Krondor, the rise of narrative-focused RPGs on PC might have looked very different. This isn't just a forgotten classic. It's one of the cornerstones of PC RPG history. From the creators of Age of Decadence, Colony Ship is another RPG that proves tactical combat and role-playing depth don't have to be opposites. They can actually fuel each other. It's set entirely aboard a massive generation ship, a self-contained world where society has splintered into factions, ideologies, and power struggles. Unlike the sweeping fantasy landscapes or sprawling post-apocalyptic wastelands most RPGs lean on, this thrives in claustrophobic corridors, rusty habitats, and the fragile balance of a society trapped in space. What makes it stand out immediately is the level of choice and consequence. The turn-based fights are unforgiving, demanding smart positioning, clever use of cover, and a keen understanding of your crew's strengths and weaknesses. It borrows some DNA from XCOM's tactical systems, but layers it with old-school RPG sensibilities where a single decision can change your entire playthrough. It's not a game that holds your hand. It can feel harsh at first, failing quests, losing allies, and stumbling through political minefields is part of the experience. Some players might find it punishing or even alienating, but for others, that challenge is the point. Every victory feels earned. Every alliance secured feels like it could collapse at any moment. And the story keeps shifting in ways that make the ship feel like a living, breathing society. Visually, it's not flashy. The environments are functional rather than beautiful. But that's also what makes it special. It's laser-focused on systems, writing, and player. The sense of immersion doesn't come from cinematic cutscenes, but from being pulled into the politics, betrayals, and survival choices of life aboard a doomed voyage. Colony Ship is still evolving, but even in its current state, it's a bold, uncompromising RPG that blends tactical strategy with role-playing freedom in a way few modern games attempt. If you've ever wished for an XCOM-style game, but with the depth of a full-blown JRPG, then Troubleshooter Abandoned Children might be one of the most overlooked gems on PC. It didn't make a huge splash in the mainstream, but those who discovered it realized just how ambitious it really was. At first glance, it looks like a familiar turn-based tactics game. Cover systems, percentage-based attacks, managing line of sight, but then it starts layering on systems that go far beyond what you'd expect. Each character has sprawling skill trees, multiple job paths, and an insane number of synergies to explore. Unlike a lot of tactical games where your soldiers are disposable, it treats every unit as a fully fleshed out RPG character with unique backstories, quests, and relationships. It's less about commanding nameless recruits and more about guiding a cast of heroes through a long, evolving narrative. The story itself leans heavily into anime-inspired drama, with politics, conspiracies, and emotional character arcs that could easily fill multiple seasons of a show. Some players might find it overwhelming. It's wordy and sometimes clunky in translation, but there's no denying the sheer effort put into building this world. It feels alive in a way that most tactical games don't even attempt. Of course, ambition comes with trade-offs. Missions can run long, and the amount of text might put off players who just want straightforward strategy battles. The UI can feel a little dated, too, which isn't surprising for an indie project of this scale. But for those willing to dive in, it offers a tactical sandbox unlike anything else on the market. What's most impressive is how it bridges two genres that rarely meet. It has the tactical precision of XCOM, but the heart, customization, and storytelling of a classic RPG. That blend makes Troubleshooter not just an underrated strategy title, but one of the most ambitious indie RPGs in years. Tucked away in Falcom's history is Zwei, the Ilvered Insurrection, a quirky ARPG that few people outside of PC players ever touched. Released in Japan back in 2009 and localized almost a decade later, it blends real-time combat with an unusual leveling system that makes it stand out. The story follows Ragna, a hot-headed pilot, and Alwyn, a vampire princess trying to reclaim her lost powers. What's refreshing about Zwei is its dynamic duo. Instead of a lone hero, you constantly swap between the two characters. Ragna handles physical attacks, while Alwyn brings spellcasting, creating a flow that feels more tactical than your average hack-and-slash RPG. It's not about button mashing. It's about knowing when to switch roles, when to conserve resources, and how to juggle enemies using both characters' strengths. The real oddball feature is its food-based leveling system. Instead of just earning XP, you consume food to level up. Eat small snacks for quick boosts, or save up meals to gain bigger bonuses later. It forces you to think like a strategist. Do you go for immediate power or wait for a greater payoff? It's a mechanic that feels unusual at first, but it quickly grows on you, giving combat and exploration a constant sense of choice and trade-off. That said, the game wasn't flawless. The dungeon design can feel repetitive, and the art style is charming but undeniably dated. For many, it slipped under the radar, arriving years too late to make the splash it deserved. But fans who gave it a chance found something undeniably charming. In today's crowded RPG market, Zwei still feels like a breath of fresh air. It doesn't take itself too seriously, but it also rewards smart play and experimentation. For players who think they've seen it all, this forgotten Falcom gem proves there's still room for RPGs to surprise you, especially when they don't follow the usual rules. At first glance, the Guild 2 looks like a medieval management sim, running a business, trading goods, marrying into families, and climbing the social ladder. But beneath that surface lies an RPG that's all about strategy and role-playing on a societal scale. Instead of grinding monsters, you're navigating politics, controlling guilds, and building dynasties. It's not just about your character, it's about your legacy. What makes it so fascinating is the way it lets you role-play through systems rather than dialogue trees. Want to be a respected merchant? Focus on trade routes and keep your reputation spotless. Want to be a corrupt power broker? Bribe officials, sabotage rivals, and build a criminal empire under the cover of night. The game embraces the idea that role-playing can be as much about economics and influence as about swords and sorcery. Of course, it has its rough edges. Released in 2006, it suffered from bugs, clunky AI, and a sometimes confusing interface that turned new players away. Reviews at the time were mixed, with many critics noting its ambition but pointing out how unstable it could be. But for those who pushed past the technical flaws, the game opened up into something unique. An RPG where combat was almost irrelevant, replaced with the drama of medieval life. Over the years, it's become a cult classic, partly because there's still nothing else quite like it. Games like Crusader Kings took the dynastic aspect further, but the Guild 2 remained special for how personal it felt. You weren't just pushing pawns on a map, you were building the daily life of a family, a business, and eventually an entire dynasty. For strategy RPG fans looking for something different, it's worth revisiting, warts and all.
The wagon is rolling.
Few RPGs blend survival mechanics, exploration, and a haunting atmosphere, quite like Miasmata. It slipped under most people's radar, but it remains one of the most unique experiments in PC gaming. Instead of throwing you into a world of combat-heavy quests, it places you on a mysterious island as a desperate scientist infected with a deadly disease. Your only goal? Survive long enough to research, experiment, and hopefully synthesize a cure before the sickness or something else takes you. What sets this apart is its focus on cartography and survival. You don't get a neatly drawn map filled with waypoints. Instead, you manually chart the terrain using landmarks and triangulation, just like a real explorer. It's clumsy at first, but the sense of discovery when you slowly piece together the geography of the island is incredibly rewarding. Combine that with the need to forage plants for medicine, manage hydration, and track your weakening physical condition, and every step feels tense. You're not a hero here. You're vulnerable, fragile, and racing against time. Adding to the tension is the mysterious creature that stalks the island. You can't really fight it. At best, you could try to avoid it, using stealth and your knowledge of the terrain. It creates a constant, oppressive atmosphere. You never quite feel safe, and that unease becomes the driving force behind the game's slow burn suspense. Miasmata is undeniably rough around the edges. The visuals are dated, the controls can feel clunky, and its pacing requires patience. But those flaws are tied to its identity. It's not trying to be a slick action game. It's about immersion, vulnerability, and a deep respect for exploration as gameplay. For players willing to sink into its rhythm, it delivers an experience few other RPGs even attempt. Over a decade later, it still stands as a reminder of what small studios can achieve when they follow a vision uncompromised by trends. Sometimes the best ideas in RPGs come from simply smashing two genres together and seeing what sticks. Tactical Breach Wizards is exactly the kind of experiment. A turn-based strategy RPG where you play modern-day wizards decked out in tactical gear, using magic to clear rooms. It's as bizarre as it sounds, and that's exactly what makes it memorable. The hook is simple. Every encounter is essentially a puzzle. You don't just run in blasting. You position your squad of spellcasters, chain abilities, and manipulate the battlefield in ways that feel more like solving a logic problem than playing a traditional RPG. One wizard might shield allies from enemy fire, while another yanks a guard across the room with a spell and slams them into their own teammate. The joy comes from setting up those combos, watching them unfold in slow motion, and realizing the game wants you to think several moves ahead. What makes it shine is its humor. The writing leans into the absurdity of the premise, with self-aware jokes and banter between characters who know how ridiculous it is that they're clearing buildings with fireballs and levitation spells. It never takes itself too seriously, which keeps the pace light even as the puzzles grow increasingly complex. That said, it's not without rough edges. Some players found the early access version a little light on content, and the art style isn't going to win over everyone. It's quirky, almost scrappy, and feels more like an indie proof of concept than a polished AAA title. But honestly, that's part of the charm. For fans of tactical RPGs who feel like they've already played every possible variation of squad-based combat, Tactical Breach Wizards is a reminder that fresh ideas can still appear out of nowhere. It's clever, funny, and experimental in a way only PC gaming tends to encourage.